We're here with Willie Douglas. Are you there, Willie?
Willie Harris.
Willie Harris, excuse me. They're talking about, oh man, a couple of the historical figures. I got my names from the Black Stuntmen Association. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yes. So we're talking about quite an interesting issue, part of Stockton history, and it's something that the Black Stuntmen Association has virtually discovered or rediscovered. Interesting part of Stockton history and African American history. Give us a little bit of background on these two stagecoach drivers that we'll be discussing, William Robeson and George Monroe.
Well, William Robeson lived in Stockton, and he worked for Wells Fargo from 1850 to 1890. And he drove from Stockton through the Sierras into Sierra Nevada, hauling gold and passengers for Wells Fargo. And Wells Fargo have never honored this man. And the only honor that Mr. Robeson got is when I got the city of Stockton to honor him last February. But Wells Fargo have refused. And Mr. Robeson and George Monroe have no one to speak for them except Willie Harris and the Black Stuntmen Association. And that's why I'm here today to speak for these two heroes.
Now, when we were looking up Mr. William Robeson, found a lot of interesting, I guess, hidden gems in the history. I mean, if you look on Wells Fargo's page, it mentions that he drove for Wells Fargo between Stockton, California, and Sierra Nevada gold mines. He was born in Virginia, and he gained his freedom by serving in the U.S. Army. And in 1847, he arrived in California during the Mexican-American War. And it says, while employed as a Wells Fargo wagon driver, Robeson worked for civil rights in his community. But there's actually quite a bit about his history that is to be uncovered and discovered. Nothing short of amazing, especially during the time. What's been the reason? I mean, has there been pushback for why he's not already on the commercials, or at least a representation of him? I mean, was it that there weren't very many black stagecoach drivers, or was it a significant part of their entourage, or tell us what Wells Fargo's been talking?
Well, what I could find out, it was only two, George Monroe and William Robeson. And when I approached Wells Fargo with the idea, they gave me the runaround. They told me they couldn't find nobody could drive no black person could drive a six-up. And I told them that I knew two. Then I found out they did a small commercial or whatever back in the late 1989 or 90, somewhere along there. But nothing since then. And they told me they didn't take solicited ideas. So John Stump, I think, was the CEO. I wrote him. I wrote Beverly Smith. I wrote Valerie Williams. I wrote Brenda Wright. And I still didn't get any answer. They said that they were still not taking solicited ideas. So I asked them, what was the reason that Wells Fargo cannot show what black people did back in the late 1800s? I also told them it's a right for black kids to know their Western heroes. What do black kids know about their Western heroes? Probably nothing except bucking the preacher. And they still flat refuse. So I'm starting a campaign now to fight back. And I'm asking all black people that bank with Wells Fargo to call Wells Fargo. And if Wells Fargo don't want to help us, we shouldn't help them.
All right. Now, I want to give a little bit more of the history, just so people really can appreciate. I found this information at blackpast.org. community of Stockton, and of course, for the greater community at large. I mean, African American accomplishments are American accomplishments. African American history is American history. This man, besides being a person who really was able to become someone who would be considered wealthy in his time as far as having real estate and property, he also was instrumental in the civil rights of our community. This year, 25 years he fought for black rights. In 1856, he was one of 64 delegates to the Second Colored Convention that met in Sacramento that December, petitioning the state legislature to allow black men and women to testify in civil and criminal cases. The right which was given in 1863, something that he was fighting for almost a decade beforehand. And then when 15 years later, when the District Educational Convention met in Stockton, November 20th, 1871, to call for integration of California public schools, Robeson was very active in that meeting, along Reverend Jeremiah Sanderson, who was a notable civil rights leader at the time. And he became a member of that convention's 12-man executive committee, which it says it wasn't successful in integrating the schools at that time, but it did begin right here in Stockton in 1873. So, I mean, a very important man, not just in Wells Fargo history, but in state history and national history.
Well, why can't Wells Fargo show the public what this man did? Now, Beverly Smith told me that they had him in the library, Wells Fargo Library in San Francisco. And I fired back and said, well, how many black people go to San Francisco to tour Wells Fargo Library? It'd be plain and simple to show on national TV what this hero did. And also George Monroe. Now, let's take George Monroe. What stagecoach driver that drove 3 presidents that was white? None. But take a look at him. He drove 3 presidents. And he had to be an expert to drive 3 presidents. President Grant called him an expert. And I like for everyone to imagine a man driving a stagecoach with 6 horses through Yosemite back in the late 1800s. It was almost impossible. But you look today that Wells Fargo is just like the civil rights back in the late 50s and 60s. And as I said before, someone has to stand up. Rosa Parks stood up for the state of Alabama. Nobody knew who she was, but what happened? It brought everything to the light about us and racism. Racism today is alive and well. Good example. You take the white colleges in the South. They got black football players that done won the Heisman Trophy and you name it. Your politician sits back on Saturdays and watch these guys perform. But when the ball game is over and they go vote at the polls, nobody knows them. You got to show ID. That's why I'm saying racism's still well and alive. Only thing different, it's not the sheets anymore. And you understand what I'm saying. And we have to do something about that. If 32 to 33 million blacks in America, we should stand up to Wells Fargo. I also did some soul searching about back in the late 50s. What was that TV series? Tales of Wells Fargo with Dale Robinson. And if you look on the call sheet and all that, you can see who was the stagecoach drivers. All white. I doubt if any black was ever in that any of those segments. It was 200 segments. Why couldn't Wells Fargo show the public then who was the heroes and what they did for Wells Fargo, which Robeson and Monroe did? That's my fight. I will not back down. A quitter never win, and a winner never quits. That's me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And we know that from your history being a part of the Black Stuntmen Association organization that was formed out of necessity. What was the founding date of the BSA?
I think it was June of 1967. We fought racism then. And the reason that you had the Black Stuntmen Association, we was the only group that had women. Just because it's called Black Stuntmen's Association, we have women. We started out with females because the Hollywood at that time was doing paint downs. If you had a black actor, no stuntman, they painted the white stunt guys down to double the black actors. We had to file charges with the EEOC. Good example, when we started in 1967, there was no blacks behind, in front of the camera. No blacks in makeup and wardrobe. In sound, you name it, there was no blacks. Most of the blacks that worked at the studio then was janitors and caretakers for the lawn. We changed all of that. What you see today with all of your black superstars and movie stars and all of that stuff, it was the Black Stuntmen's Association who fought for it. Now we are fighting for Mr. Robeson and Mr. Monroe.
We're speaking with Willie Harris, president of the Black Stuntmen's Association, talking about these two incredible icons in American history that have virtually been forgotten or well, as far as mainstream information goes, maybe cast to the side. Willie Robeson, Stagecoach drivers for Wells Fargo. And we're talking about the push to get historically representative commercial Fargo. If you notice the commercials of the Stagecoach drivers, they are always Caucasians. And these two important drivers have never been featured inside of the 200 plus episodes from the 70s you talked about Wells Fargo's program. Now, I found some information on Wells Fargo's own website. It's at stories.wf.com/George Monroe model stagecoach driver, all separated by hyphen. So if you look this up, you'll find it's in a section called Living Our Values, Our History. George Monroe, model stagecoach driver, the man who would become renowned for driving stagecoaches and 3 U.S. presidents into the Yosemite Valley, started his life in Georgia and headed west at the age of 11. And talked about his great accomplishments, how he was the best. His title that people knew him for was the best all-around rangeman in the West. The best in the West. This guy, George Monroe, was known for. No one can handle a stagecoach like he could. As evidence, you mentioned, Mr. Harris, that President Grant personally selected him and even rode what they call shotgun with him through the Yosemite Valley.
Yes.
Now, it also mentions that he was described by his employees as the best all-around racer in the West. And this was in 1855. He literally was a legend during his time. And he also trained and drove horses. He had quite an influence in the industry at the time, and everyone knew who he was, but yet we don't know who he is.
No, we don't.
So you said you talked to Wells Fargo. You talked to
I talked to Beverly Smith, Valerie Williams, Lisa Filson, and also Brenda Wright's office. Also, at that time, John Stump was the CEO. I wrote him a letter. He never answered back. Now you got, I think it's Timothy Sloan is the CEO now of Wells Fargo. And I have tried to contact him. He hasn't answered back.
So you're encouraging people, you're asking for people to call into Wells Fargo and make the request themselves?
Yes. I'm asking people to call in to Wells Fargo. Not only that, Don, I'm going to try to talk to the black colleges in the South, because Wells Fargo, when these young kids graduate from college, Wells Fargo offer them credit cards. They do loans and everything with Wells Fargo. But what is Wells Fargo doing for us? Nothing. I also will try to get the Black Student Union at the white school to take a look at this.
Is there a number that you have for people to reach out to, or email address for them to contact Wells Fargo?
On my Facebook, Don, it's a list with all of the people's name and address and email on that sheet, telling you who to contact. And everyone knows, because you are in Stockton, Wells Fargo headquarters is in San Francisco. And I think that should be where people can call. If you can't get to find my sheet on my Facebook, just call information and ask them to give you the number to Wells Fargo corporate office in San Francisco. It's easy to get a hold to. And if we don't fight back, Wells Fargo is not going to change. And like I said, I hate to put this out there, but what are they doing? They want the black people to come through the back door, and they put our money out the front door. You see what I'm saying? And if we start fighting back...
I've seen these commercials my whole life, and never once have I seen, I don't know if I've seen any black people in a commercial at all, let alone a Stagecoach driver. And you're right, you know, we see Wells Fargo's name at a lot of community events. We see, you know, their branding, and they obviously do reach out to the black community, and I think it's a fair request. This isn't revolutionary what you're asking for. You're just asking for representation for actual history, which according to their own website, they're very proud of.
Absolutely.
And they're living our values, our history on their website. So,
well, where's the value for these two men? These two men made, probably back in those days, millions of dollars for Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo do not have the right to push these guys back in the dark. If you go to movies today, you still can see movies of Jesse James, Frank James, Wyatt Earp, you name it. What's out there about George Monroe and William Robeson? You got to go all the way to the library in San Francisco to look to see what these men have contributed to society. That's not right.
Yeah.
We can put a stop to that.
Go ahead.
And also, I would like to reach out to all of the black news media out there to pick up this story. I've sent out invitations that I would do an interview with any newspaper, black or white, out there. Also, look what Wells Fargo is doing to the Indians in South Dakota. They are not hurting anybody, but Wells Fargo want to take from them the same way that they have taken from us. And if they take from us, we should stop doing business with them.
Yeah, and the whole city of Seattle is voted to divest in Wells Fargo specifically for that reason. $3 billion they have moved out of Wells Fargo account. So it's definitely something people are paying attention to, and you know, they say the best way to vote is to vote with your dollars.
The best way to hurt anybody that's do stuff like Wells Fargo is in the pocket. Right. We as black people probably contributed probably $10 to $20 million a year or more to Wells Fargo. They don't want to lose that. But look what they would lose. It's common sense. It don't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. It's cheaper for them to do a commercial with these two black heroes, and what they're going to lose as black people start to walking away. Somebody in the CEO office should step up to the plate and say, look, let's sit down and talk to the Black Stuntmen Association and see what we can work out. That's another thing I've tried to do, Don. I've tried to ask for a meeting with Wells Fargo. They refuse. And I'm still asking for a meeting. I even told them I would even come to San Francisco. But I haven't gotten any reply back.
So let's say a representative for Wells Fargo is listening right now. How would they reach you to contact you to resolve the situation, to not just resolve it, but to give justice to the true history of Wells Fargo. I mean, we are talking about during the gold rush and in the gold rush route. So we're talking about piles and piles of gold being brought out down from the mountains right back into the Central Valley. Literally building. That is where much of the wealth of that company even was established. How do they reach you in order to make this right?
They can call me on my home phone. 702-646-3626, or they can email me bsa8510@gmail.com, and I will answer back.
Talking with Willie Harris, the president of the Black Stuntmen Association, organization been around since the late 60s, which was born out of necessity because discrimination against black actors and refusing them stuntmen, and when they did provide stuntmen and body doubles, they were white actors that were painted. Painted down was a phrase that I heard, and I see that there's a documentary in the works called Breaking Bones, Breaking Barriers about this exact situation. A great part of Hollywood history that might be otherwise unknown if it wasn't for individuals like yourself, Mr. Harris, who helped spread this information. Right now, the campaign we're talking about is the campaign to get Wells Fargo to recognize their own history and the history of the black stagecoach drivers that were instrumental in the late 1800s for Wells Fargo, bringing in gold and riches from the gold rush land right here into the valley. Stagecoach driver by the name of William Robeson was one of the main riders, one of the main drivers, they call him, but also somebody who was very instrumental in civil rights, California civil rights history in particular, and Stockton, having the first integrated school, starting the first integrated school here in Stockton. And we also talked about George Monroe, who was known as the best reinsman in the West. So that would be like modern terms. You would call somebody the best driver in the West Coast if they were a race car driver or something like that. This kind of status that George Monroe had during his time. And so we're talking with William Harris about getting Wells Fargo. How do we get Wells Fargo to do a commercial like that? Now, you also mentioned that something you heard earlier was that they didn't have somebody who could drive a 6-up. So 6-up is that stagecoach with 6 horses. That's what we're talking about? Right.
That's what Beverly Smith told me about 3 or 4 years ago. They didn't know any.
You have more than one stagecoach driver, black stagecoach driver, capable of doing this.
Yes.
So it sounds like this is just something that's just would be kind of easy to put together. All we're going to do is get all the parties on the same page, because I mean, wouldn't that be great for our community and great for historical recognition, and also, of course, great for Wells Fargo to celebrate this part of their history, this diverse part of their history, being a company way back in the 1800s who hired. Now these weren't slaves; these were hired, skilled workers. George Monroe and William Robeson. It seems like there'd be something they'd be very proud of.
That's what I have always thought. But how many black people know about these two men? I didn't know about these two men until 5 years ago, when I went in the bank and I saw a little picture of Mr. Robeson in the corner, and I asked the bank president, "Who is that man?" She told me, and I asked her how I could get more information. That's how I found out that Wells Fargo headquarters was in San Francisco. And I've been fighting it ever since. And I will keep on fighting it. One thing that we learned as stuntmen, we didn't give up. We lived a dangerous life. And what happened to us, when we went to work in the morning as stuntmen, if 3 things could happen to a black stuntman. He could come home to his family, or he could wind up in the hospital, or he could go to the morgue, because we didn't have proper safety gear. I got busted up in 72 because the lack of proper safety gear, and it's still going on. And speaking of paint down, I just got a call a couple of weeks ago about a paint down. And when I get through with fighting with Wells Fargo, I will go back to fight this.
Yeah, yeah. And we definitely appreciate you because really, like I said, without people like yourself and others who really make it a point not just to find out, but to share this information, I mean, there'd be so much we don't know. And so we can, as a public, we can get involved. Willie Harris of the Black Stuntmen Association, they are requesting the public to get involved by contacting Wells Fargo and letting them know that you do want to see this historical accuracy, this representation of a beautiful thing that happened even in the 1800s with respect and diversity and inclusiveness and celebrating these amazing riders, these amazing drivers, stagecoach drivers that really were counted on by the company for the most important responsibilities. I mean, driving 3 different presidents. I mean, think about what happens when you're driving a president. I mean, the Secret Service has to be involved, all that kind of stuff. Well, this is the level of responsibility that was put on these drivers. So, an amazing part of history. Again, give out your information so we can make sure that there's a way for people to reach you, especially Wells Fargo. When we share this story, that they'll have a way to get in contact with you. Your email address, if you want, I'll read it out. It's BSA, which stands for Black Stuntmen Association, BSA8510@gmail.com. That's how you can get a hold of Willie Harris, or whether you're a representative of Wells Fargo or if you're somebody in the community who wants to support this effort. Please do join the effort and support this important work. Yeah. Mr. Harris, are there any closing thoughts that you want to share?
No, I'm just saying to Wells Fargo, I'm not going away. That's the only thing I'm saying. Here's one thing. This is one thing I learned as a kid. It ain't the dog in the fight, it's the fight in the dog, and that's me.
All right. Well, we want to thank you for being on this special edition, Stockton 360 with Governor Don, expose and a community action to get William Robeson and George Monroe recognized by Wells Fargo as for who they were, model stagecoach drivers who were famous in their day for being the most excellent, the best reinsman in the West. That's what George Monroe was known as. And, of course, William Robeson, who started the first integrated school right here in Stockton, was also an integral stagecoach driver for Wells Fargo during the Gold Rush, on the Gold Rush route. So that's what we're trying to highlight. We want to thank you, Mr. Willie Harris, for your advocacy and for your stick-to-itiveness, your tenaciousness, and we know we're going to be able to hear more from you, and we hope that Wells Fargo does give in, does put forth a commercial that would show this. I mean, we're talking about a commercial, something that'd be good for them too, but man, we just want some historical accuracy in representing the Black community in a fair way.
Well, thank you. Anytime.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. And we'll talk with you as this situation unfolds and develops. And please do let us know if you get any developments, especially if there's any good news. We'd love to share it. And of course, Wells Fargo, reach out to Mr. Willie Harris, the Black Stuntmen Association. You have his information. And anybody out there in the community who wants to support this effort, get in contact with him at bsa8510@gmail.com. I want to thank you, Mr. Harris, for being on and appreciate your efforts in the community.
Thank you.
All right. So that just about does it for this